because I had just helped launch LinkedIn, which I hated, by the way.
I don't think that's ever happened to me on a call in 20-something years.
I built the Weber Group, my first company, to the largest tech PR firm in the world.
And she's like, you sure it's okay if I ask? I said, okay, now I'm concerned. Like, what could you be asking? She says, are you the founder of LinkedIn? Good afternoon and welcome to the podcast, Startup to Stock Exchange. Today, I think we are all in for a treat. And let me give you some background on this for a minute. There are three reasons that stand out in my mind why I'm excited to have Larry Weber on with us today. The first, just being very candid, I had a call with him through a mutual friend. And halfway through the call, I just stopped and I said, Larry, you've had such a career. I need to ask you for mentorship. I need to ask you for advice. I don't think that's ever happened to me on a call in 20-something years. So I was blown away by the information I was hearing, and I asked him that question. Number two, on this podcast, we've had dozens and dozens of CEOs and investment bankers and people of all caliber, but I think it's fair to say that I've never had somebody with a client roster like AT&T, Coca-Cola, GE, GM, IBM, and it goes on and on. And so I'm really excited to hear how he landed those companies and what he does for them. And last but not least, he's an author. He's an author of a new book, many books, but the most recent one is New Age of Reason. And I'm excited to hear a little bit about it and how we could get copies of it. So with all of that introduction, Larry, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Wonderful to be here, Seth.
All the way from Boston. Let's just take a step back into the background and the journey. Tell us a little bit about, I guess, what you do now and some of the things that you've accomplished in your amazing career.
Well, I'm mostly known in the public relations field, Seth. It goes back pretty far, probably over 4 decades. And the good thing the audience should know is that I never was properly trained for public relations and marketing. My master's degree is in 20th century British and American literature. So
that's unique. Okay.
I came out of school and I could just teach. Like, my parents were both prep school teachers. So I taught for 2 years. And the next summer after that, I wrote a brochure for a Fortune 500 CEO who was a family acquaintance. And my check was for $10,000, which was twice my whole year of teaching salary. So I told my new wife, and she is my wife of 44 years now, that why don't we give business a try? So we did. And I quickly thought I was going to jump out the window when I was writing a news release for Titleist golf balls on why 360 dimples are going to make your ball go further and straighter. And everybody said, oh, Larry, just be a little patient. And I met a guy named Mitch Kapoor at a party outside of MIT. This is a little over 40 years ago. And he said, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm in the PR business. I go, what do you do? He goes, well, I'm in the software business. And I literally said, what is software? And he said, come by and see me. And he had started a company called Lotus. And their first product, which really exploded the IBM PC sales and the whole personal computer revolution, started because a spreadsheet was now available on a computer. And he only had a futon in his office in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and an IBM PC. And we had to lay down on the futon as he gave me a demo of 1, 2, 3. And he said, do you get it? And I said, well, I think I do, because my grandfather in Cleveland had a small accounting firm. And sometimes he would come home and was really angry. And I'd say to my grandmother, why is Grandpa so angry? And she said, because somebody missed a mistake that was put in the general ledger about 2 months ago, and they have to erase every entry that was put in for 2 months. And it's going to take them over a week to fix this for a public company in Cleveland, Ohio. And I said, our Mitch says, you get it. Now we just fix that in a second. So technology had put its teeth in me, and I never looked back. I built the Weber Group, my first company, to the largest tech PR firm in the world. And then I sold it to Interpublic in New York, who asked me to build the largest PR firm in the world, which I did with their checkbook. That's called Weber Shandwick today. And then I took a year off to write my second book. Nobody read my first book, Seth.
That's encouraging. First of all, that you were brave enough to continue onward, but also for anybody that fails the first time, give it a second go.
Well, I learned that from technology too. These guys would write software, it'd be a dud. They just said, scrap it and write again, So the second book was good because I had just helped launch LinkedIn for Reid Hoffman, which I hated, by the way, the first few years because everybody was asking me for a job. That's how it worked.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Because that's one of the most fascinating things on our previous call. Just to digress for a second, over the summer, I did a post on LinkedIn, and the post basically outlined how I was away in upstate New York, Monticello, for a weekend with my family, and some of the neighbors there know me. And we were going into the lake, and this woman comes up to me, and she says, I don't know her, but she says, "Can I ask you a personal question?" I said, "Sure, go ahead." And she said, "I've spoken to some of the people that live around here, and they said that you're a founder." I said, "Okay, I've had the opportunity to found a few companies, but yeah, that's true." She's like, "Can I tell you the other thing that I heard?" I said, "Sure." And she's like, "You sure it's okay if I ask?" I said, "Okay, now I'm concerned. Like, what could you be asking?" She says, "Are you the founder of LinkedIn?" And I'm cracking up inside. I'm like, what in the world would make you think? She's like, "Well, I heard you're a founder, and I heard you have a LinkedIn company. So I thought you were the founder of LinkedIn." And in my mind, I'm like, Reid Hoffman would be like going out of his mind if he heard that I was the founder. And then when we had our first phone call a few weeks ago, you casually mentioned how you had this conversation with Reid and LinkedIn. I was like, I can't believe your knowledge and your history and your access to it. So I'd love to hear about that interaction with Reid.
He had the idea. He was the first investor, in Facebook. He and Peter Thiel. He told me about Facebook, and I wasn't that impressed. I'd already been, interested in MySpace and the sort of those other social-facing networks. And what Reid said is there's obvious room for a business Facebook. And I said, yeah, I guess the greatest ideas are the easiest to explain. And he said, that's what I'm going to do. But ultimately, the conversation we had, I had just finished working with a company that we had launched up here in Boston called Monster.com. Part of my book, A New Age of Reason, talks about the evolution of technologies. They just don't happen. They evolve. And what Reid and I talked about was it really started with the help wanted section of your newspaper. That's sort of the beginning of this technology timeline. And then somehow that evolved into Monster.com, which was originally called the Monster Board, which had put jobs up. And then let's make that even better and a little more interactive because it wasn't that interactive. And that was LinkedIn and how you create a professional network to try to get jobs. And that's really what it started as, but it evolved even further into more of a content machine and networking platform for people in business. And I think it's actually evolved quite well now where it's, one of the more powerful marketing tools executives have in finance and capital markets, entrepreneurs, anywhere. So
I definitely want to circle back about LinkedIn and personal brands, towards the end of our conversation. But so continue that journey. So you had another exit, and now what?
Well, now I've been building a company called Racepoint Global that really just advises large companies about positioning their brand in the digital world. And I work with companies like John Deere, Intel, Panasonic, but we're a boutique. I like to say we're the Relais and Chateau of public relations right now.
I'm curious because, you had said you had started your journey sort of on the tech PR focus side of things, and looking at your current roster, whether it's, I also saw someplace the Pittsburgh Steelers, and my wife is from Pittsburgh, so I'm prone to looking for that. But you've got John Deere and Panasonic and others all in a variety of different industries. And so do you feel like when it comes to PR and that small intersect of IR, but in general, marketing, branding, storytelling, do you need to be an expert in tech, or is it the core of what you do and it's applicable to any industry?
I think it's the circulatory system of all businesses is technology and software. I used to say every company's a technology company, even if you make potato chips. Now I say every company's a software company. And I believe every executive has to understand at least the basic understandings of how software works, how software is created, because it affects everything. And it can give you a competitive advantage if you really use technology and innovation and leverage it, again, to win. So every company I advise, I say, reposition yourselves as an innovator, a technology user, and that will give you competitive advantage. Then add the idea of purpose or morality to your business, that you're also trying to solve a world problem. For example, John Deere, how do we help farmers have a better yield because we're going to have to feed 2 billion more people by 2050? That makes it a good company or a moral company. So I do that and go and try to explain that to CEOs. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
And when you're speaking to these CEOs, a question that I get very often when it comes to storytelling or branding or marketing, and I'm sure this question has been thrown at you, and it's probably multifaceted. What's the ROI, right? In other words, when you're talking to a CEO and they're contemplating how much of their budget do they want to spend on PR and marketing, whether it's everything from brochures to getting into TechCrunch or the Wall Street Journal. Well, how do I measure my ROI, right? We're not talking about the digital of how many clicks am I getting and how does that turn into a direct purchase or direct revenue, but the value of marketing and branding as a whole. What do you typically answer to them?
Well, I'm pretty much about brand equity, and how do you build equity, trust, thoughtfulness, definition, storytelling into a brand that makes it a powerful competitor to anybody else. And I'm a believer in unstructured data. I think we've lived so long with structured data and quantifiable ROI that I believe in, wow, I'm doing work with Panasonic on the intelligent city. And you get that message across and people get it. They understand and they respect that brand for what they're trying to do. So is it a hardcore quantifiable? Yeah, we can get some quant on it, but I think it's more about that feeling, that understanding that this is a powerful company doing the right things, and I enjoy working with it.
And when you're talking about that brand equity, when it comes to, I think a lot of the listeners here run the gamut from startups to publicly traded companies. Are there any PR strategies that you feel are really non-negotiable? Meaning, if you've got a budget, you have to focus on this, and the rest might be, bells and whistles. Is there anything that's applicable both to that startup?
Even if you're a startup, you have to decide what business you're in, and you have to really go deeply to understand what it is. Example, I told Deere they weren't in the tractor business. I thought they were going to throw me out of Moline, Illinois. I said, of course you sell tractors, but what you're really in is you're helping farmers have better yields. So often answering the question what business you're in is not really the right answer. And I say you've got to start with really understanding the competitive space. I can't stand when an entrepreneur says we have no competitors.
Oh, it drives me nuts, Larry. It's funny, when I ask that question, I say, I know the answer you're going to give me already. And it doesn't matter whether they're in e-commerce or biotech or pharma. I said, if you had a gun to your head, who would you name as 3 competitors? Invariably, we don't have competition. I know you do it better, faster, smarter, cheaper, but they always say that.
Yeah. So I think know what business you're in. And then I think the other non-negotiable thing is identifying the influencers in your industry. Who are the 5 most important influencers? They might be a mommy blogger if you're selling infant stuff. It might not be a corporation. It might not be a financial institution. It might be one person that is highly influential that you need to make sure they understand your story.
And I'm curious, as somebody who has had such success in the traditional PR sense of the word, and for some of us that might be naive, that means getting an article in different publications. I think many years ago, many of our publicly traded companies would just put out a press release, hope somebody reads it, and call it a day. But how do you see the current integration between the traditional way of doing things and the digital side? I mean, You just mentioned mommy bloggers. That wasn't a target audience a couple of years ago.
Doing your homework hasn't changed, the importance of doing your homework. But what's happening is technology, especially generative AI, is allowing us to get to data faster that's accurate. It passes a veracity test, and it's thoughtful. Example would be a CEO says to me, Larry, I really want to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And I go, well, I don't know if you deserve to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, but let's see. And what I used to do was personally look at which writers at the Wall Street Journal get the most front page articles. So you start there. Now, what category do they cover? And that. Third, who are their third party people that they ask opinions of about the category? So you start really cascading the research about a specific journalist to the point where you know which journalist would write about this client if there's a valuable story there. Then you look at the angles that this writer and his editors use. So you start to build this vast data set by writer, not by publication. That is getting much easier with technology, much easier with data, especially if the data has integrity. And then when you're ready to go up to the plate and you have a story that you really believe belongs there, you get the front page Wall Street Journal.
Interesting. I think a lot of CEOs don't recognize the steps that go into, they figure that there's just a button that you push and you get to the right people. The fact that you've had several exits is really incredible. I always joke that the day after I had an exit, not near what you had, I'm sure, but an exit nonetheless, then the next morning I was at a conference, literally setting up a booth by myself for another event, putting on the skirt and trying to stretch the banner. And at one point I thought to myself, I'm like, I just sold a company yesterday. Why am I the guy the next morning that's setting up the booth? And the answer is because I love what I do. I love what I do and I have a passion for it. Are there any suggestions or guidance that you can give myself, our audience, on how to scale a business? Number one. And number two is, when you start a business, do you always have in mind that you're looking for an eventual exit, or does that just happen after you've had success?
It changes with the businesses, right? So the first business that I was an entrepreneur, the Weber Group, I never thought about an exit. So to answer your last question first, I looked at building and scaling a business, but I first had to determine how am I differentiated, what businesses I'm in. And back then, PR was pretty vanilla. So no matter if you were a technology company, a consumer company, a healthcare company, you went to a PR company. It's sort of like if your foot hurt, you couldn't go to a podiatrist. You had to go to your general doctor. And so I said, well, geez, this technology stuff's really taking off. Why don't we become an expert in technology marketing, technology PR? And that led to one client at a time. Now, on scalability, you have to look at a constant analysis of what clients will help you grow the business. And all clients are not the same. So if you get these, what I call weather directing clients, so that you go, gee, everybody loves NVIDIA right now. I could have predicted they would have loved NVIDIA. And so I want to get there before everybody loves NVIDIA, back when they were doing chips for games. All right. And eventually there was going to be a need for semiconductors for visualization. That's why they're the most valuable company in the world now. But get there before and ride them. And if you do that to 10 companies, you're going to get at least one or two that are a rocket ship. And that helps you scale. That's the first thing. The second thing is, once you're able to find really good people that actually execute the work, let them do everything. Keep your hands off the work. So don't put that apron around the table at the trade.
Right. Lesson learned. Right. Being that you've worked with so many notable CEOs over the years, I'm curious: is there a common denominator amongst them, not in terms of their ability or their skill set, but do they recognize the value of PR and of branding and storytelling? And then I guess a follow-up to that is you and I spoke briefly, and I found it so, I want to say comforting or validating that there's this distinction between the personal brand and the company brand. And I think that, I'm a big advocate on the personal side. Do these CEOs recognize that, or is it something you had to beat up on for them to recognize the value of it?
If you go back, I think when I started the idea of CEO as brand as a separate program, in other words, have the program for the company brand, but you, CEO, you need to also have a complementary positioning and a complementary brand that puts your face out there, whether it's with the company brand or without the company brand. So spend some money to do that. And I think some of them got it right away, but some of them waited, and especially in the technology area, where they started to see the power of personality and the power of shaping a personal brand could actually help add 20% value to the stock of a technology company. So now you see the world where there's Larry Ellison's personality or Mark Benioff's personality, or the best, of course, whether you liked him or not, he was a brilliant brander, which was Steve Jobs. Tell your audience 2 things they should listen to and how good he became as CEO as brand was the last speech he gave before he died to the graduating class of Stanford, and just amazing insights into business and the future of business. And then when he introduced in 2007 the first smartphone, the iPhone, and he's walking across that stage and he looks out at the audience and holds up the iPhone and says, "Don't you people get it? It's 3 machines in one. It's a phone, it's a computer, and it's a camera." And this man knew about CEO as brand, and others do too. Jamie Dimon's he really understands. I haven't worked with Jamie, but he totally understands the importance of his personal brand as it relates to JP Morgan Chase. Bill Gates came to him after a while, but now I think he's like a picture-perfect brand on LinkedIn. If anybody wants to see how a famous CEO handles himself with new content and positioning for solving big health-related problems, Bill Gates' site on LinkedIn is terrific. So that's just some examples, Seth.
I think that's fascinating, and the fact that you recognize that having a professional or a dynamic, well-positioned LinkedIn profile is important, even for the big guys, and even for today. It is something that I think people look to in helping form their decision or perspective of who is this guy about, and what is the company about. I would imagine that you're passionate about writing to an extent. I mean, I think it's about 6 books you've published. Is that right?
This is my second.
7. Tell us, if you could just give us a couple of nuggets about the book and what the current book, and what it's about.
So, A New Age of Reason, Harnessing the Power of Tech for Good. I thought long and hard about it, but what it really drove the writing of the book was the original Age of Reason had all these religious zealots on one side going, "Oh, we don't need all this science and we don't need all these discovery and innovations." And then you had the scientists on the other side saying, "Hey, guess what? We can solve that disease with a vaccine. We can solve this problem with this mathematic algorithm." And so I sort of saw similar things happening in our modern day, which I couldn't believe. People saying AI's evil and it's going to take away jobs, and oh my gosh, and technology's just terrible. Technology is very good, and I am a technology optimist. That's what the book's about. It's about understanding the waves of technology, which have been 7, to today, where it's humanity and technology. It's about the most important technologies of our day, which are AI. I dive deeply into. I dive into quantum computing, which will be the next rock star technology that we all hear about and understand because it's physics-based computing. I go into CRISPR for healthcare, go into climate tech for understanding how we can actually get all the plastic out of the ocean and bring the temperatures down of the ocean. So I do that. Then I go into business and I tell CEOs how you need to look at the future and set up a company with a chief ethics officer, a chief innovation officer that isn't looking at technology just to run the company, but technology to be a competitive advantage. And then also try to find a problem that you can solve while still making money, that helps society, that helps the problems we're facing, and makes a difference in a moral and thoughtful way. That's what the book's about.
You know what? I think that so often there are books out there that are written by people that are professing to know certain topics or certain industries, and they themselves have never done it. You know, very similar to on LinkedIn, people that are gurus and experts, and they've never done anything that they're teaching people how to do themselves. And I think that in this case, reading a book like this from somebody with your type of background, exposure, experience is going to be a great read. I assume it's available on Amazon, correct?
Yep. Amazon. Yep.
Fantastic. Well, Larry, I want to just thank you again for your time, your wisdom. I think anybody that wants to learn more about you, there's chock full of information, videos, content online. I really appreciate the friendship, and I hope we'll visit again in 6 or 12 months, and maybe a new book or an update on Racepoint. And thank you again.
Thank you so much, Seth.